In the constellation of great writers, certain stars shine with a particular brilliance that transcends time and borders. Victor Hugo is one of these literary beacons, a man whose pen not only revolutionized French literature, but also profoundly marked the conscience of a nation. His extraordinary journey is that of a precocious genius who became a cultural icon, a romantic poet transformed into a voice of social conscience, and a political exile whose words shook an empire. Our story begins on February 26, 1802, in Besançon, a city nestled in the east of France. Europe is then in a state of upheaval. Napoleon Bonaparte has just seized power in France, and the continent is on the brink of a series of conflicts that will redraw the political map. It is in this tumultuous context that Victor Hugo is born, the fruit of the improbable union between Leopold Hugo, a general in the Napoleonic army with republican convictions, and Sophie Trebuchet, a fervent royalist. This paradoxical alliance between a soldier of the Republic and a woman with monarchist sympathies foreshadows in a way the contradictions and evolutions that will punctuate Victor Hugo's life. From his earliest days, young Victor is immersed in a world of contrasts and ideological conflict, an experience that will forge his ability to embrace the complexity of the world in his future writings. Hugo's early years are marked by a nomadic life, following his father's military assignments from Besançon to Paris, Naples, and Madrid. The young Hugo is exposed to a kaleidoscope of cultures and experiences that will later nourish his overflowing imagination. His early travels instill in him an open-mindedness and an insatiable curiosity that will become distinctive traits of his personality and work. However, this itinerant childhood is not without difficulties. The long absences of his father and the tensions that undermine the parental couple deeply affect young Victor. His mother becomes the pillar of his universe, an influence that will later be reflected in his writings, where female characters often occupy a central and complex place. At the age of 10, Victor Hugo begins to reveal the first signs of his literary genius. A boarder at the prestigious Lycée Louis-le-Grand in Paris, he embarks on writing poetry and tragedies. These early works, though juvenile, already hint at a precocious mastery of language and an extraordinary poetic sensitivity. In 1817, at just 15 years old, Hugo takes an audacious step. He participates in a poetry competition organized by the Académie Française. His poem, titled Les Avantages de l'étude, does not win the first prize but receives an honorable mention. This early recognition acts as a catalyst, reinforcing his determination to pursue a literary career despite his father's reluctance to see him destined for the École Polytechnique. The following years are marked by a creative frenzy. Hugo writes tirelessly, eagerly exploring different literary genres: poetry, novels, and theater. In 1822, at the age of 20, he publishes his first poetry collection, Odes et Poésies diverses. The success is overwhelming. King Louis XVIII himself, impressed by the young poet's talent, grants him a pension, thus acknowledging his exceptional precocity. But Hugo does not confine himself to poetry. In 1823, he publishes his first novel, Han de Land, a Gothic work that already foreshadows his taste for marginalized characters and extreme situations. This novel, although criticized for its exuberant style, reveals Hugo's ability to create striking atmospheres and memorable characters. In 1826, Bug Jargal, a novel dealing with the slave revolt in Saint-Domingue, is published. This work announces the social commitment that will characterize his later writings. Hugo addresses themes such as slavery and human dignity, already demonstrating his capacity to intertwine fiction and social reflection. However, it is with theater that Hugo will truly shake the French literary scene. In 1827, he writes Cromwell, a play that will never be performed but whose preface becomes the manifesto of the Romantic movement. In this revolutionary preface, Hugo defends a new conception of theater, liberated from classical constraints. He advocates for an art that blends the sublime and the grotesque, the tragic and the comic, thus reflecting the complexity of human nature. This preface marks a decisive break with the theatrical conventions of the time and lays the foundations for romantic drama. But it is in 1830 that Hugo truly makes a grand impact with Hernani. The first performance of this play at the Théâtre Français on February 25, 1830, remains in the annals as the Battle of Hernani. That night, the theater becomes a battlefield between defenders of classicism and supporters of romanticism. Invectives fly, applause and boos mingle in an unprecedented tumult. This evening marks a true revolution in the history of French theater and establishes Hugo as the undisputed leader of the Romantic movement. Hernani is not merely a scandalous success. The play, set in 16th century Spain, features passionate characters torn between love and honor. Hugo deploys audacious versification, breaking classical rules of the Alexandrine and infusing a new musicality into theatrical language. The famous monologue of Don Carlos before Charlemagne's tomb becomes an anthology piece, illustrating Hugo's ability to blend philosophical reflections with poetic lyricism. As his literary career takes flight, Hugo's personal life also experiences upheavals. In 1822, he marries his childhood love, Adèle Fouché, against his mother's wishes. This marriage, though passionate at first, will be marked by infidelities on both sides. Hugo maintains a liaison lasting nearly 50 years with Juliette Drouet, an actress who becomes his muse and confidant. This complex relationship between Hugo, his wife, and his mistress profoundly influences his work, enriching his reflections on love, passion, and fidelity. The 1830s see Hugo reach the pinnacle of his literary glory. In 1831, he publishes Notre-Dame de Paris, a novel that achieves phenomenal success. This work marks a turning point in Hugo's career and in the history of the French novel. The story of the hunchback Quasimodo and the beautiful gypsy Esmeralda captivates the public's imagination and contributes to a burgeoning interest in the Middle Ages. However, Notre-Dame de Paris is much more than a historical novel. It is a true ode to Gothic architecture and a passionate plea for the preservation of heritage. Hugo depicts the cathedral as a character in its own right, a symbol of history and the soul of Paris. His famous chapter, C'est citoyen là, where he meditates on the power of printing versus architecture, offers profound reflections on the evolution of modes of human expression. The novel also serves as a striking social fresco of medieval Paris, portraying a complex society populated by colorful characters: the tormented priest, Claude Frollo, the carefree Esmeralda, the poet Gringoire, and the captain Phoebus. Through these characters, Hugo explores themes dear to him: the struggle between good and evil, the redemptive power of love, and social injustice. Hugo's style in Notre-Dame de Paris is exceptionally rich. His descriptions of Paris are vividly alive, bringing the medieval city to life in all its diversity and complexity. His writing marries lyricism with epic, the grotesque with the sublime, creating a work of unparalleled evocative power. Yet Hugo does not limit himself to literary successes. He increasingly engages in the political and social life of his time. Named Father of France in 1845 by King Louis-Philippe, he sits in the Chamber of Peers, where he delivers impassioned speeches on issues such as freedom of the press, the abolition of the death penalty, and education for all. His eloquence, honed through years of poetic and theatrical practice, shines in the political arena. It is during this time that a tragic event profoundly marks Hugo: the death of his daughter Leopoldine in 1843. The young woman, just 19, drowns in the Seine with her husband a few months after their marriage. This devastating loss plunges Hugo into deep depression and greatly influences his later poetry, particularly the collection Les Contemplations. The Revolution of 1848 marks a turning point in Hugo's political life. Initially a supporter of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, he quickly opposes him when it becomes clear that the president has dictatorial ambitions. During the coup d'état of December 2nd, 1851, Hugo attempts to organize resistance but is forced into exile. He leaves France for Brussels, then Jersey, and finally Guernsey. This exile, which will last nearly 20 years, does not stifle Hugo's voice. Rather, it gives it new breadth. It is during this period that he writes some of his most powerful and engaged works. Les Châtiments, published in 1853, is a virulent collection of poems against Napoleon III. In it, Hugo unleashes his satirical wit and lyrical power to denounce the coup d'état and the imperial regime. Poems like Nox and L'Expiation have become classics of political poetry. However, it is with Les Misérables, published in 1862, that Hugo reaches the zenith of his literary career. This monumental novel, the fruit of several decades of work, is both a historical fresco, a social novel, and a philosophical meditation on justice and redemption. The story of Jean Valjean, an ex-convict pursued by Inspector Javert, has become one of the most famous in world literature. Les Misérables is a work of exceptional ambition and scope. In it, Hugo addresses burning social themes: poverty, injustice, child exploitation, and the condition of women. He denounces social inequalities with a force and compassion that deeply resonate with readers. The novel also reflects on the possibility of redemption and the nature of justice. The characters in Les Misérables have become archetypes. Jean Valjean symbolizes redemption through love and sacrifice. Javert embodies inflexible law. Fantine represents social injustice, and Cosette symbolizes innocence and hope. Through these characters, Hugo explores the complexity of human nature, showing how circumstances can shape an individual's destiny. Hugo's style in Les Misérables reaches peaks of virtuosity. He alternates between narrative, detailed description, philosophical digression, and lyrical outburst. His famous chapter on the Battle of Waterloo is a tour de force that combines historical analysis with poetic evocation, while his depiction of the sewers of Paris becomes a striking metaphor for society and its depths. During his exile, Hugo becomes a sort of moral conscience for Europe. He takes a stand on numerous political and social issues, defending the oppressed and denouncing injustices. His home in Hauteville House on the island of Guernsey becomes a pilgrimage site for intellectuals and political dissidents. There, he receives visitors from around the world, maintains extensive correspondence, and continues to write tirelessly. It is also during this period that Hugo becomes interested in spiritualism, participating in numerous seances, where he believes he communicates with the spirits of historical figures and deceased loved ones. These experiences influence his writing, particularly in Les Contemplations and La Légende des siècles, where he explores themes of death, the afterlife, and human destiny. Hugo's return to France in 1870, after the fall of Napoleon III, is triumphant. He is welcomed as a national hero, elected deputy of Paris, and continues to fight for his ideals in the National Assembly. Despite his advanced age, he remains an indispensable figure in French political and cultural life. The last years of Hugo's life are marked by a series of personal losses, but also by unprecedented public recognition. At his death on May 22, 1885, all of France mourns. His national funeral, which sees nearly 2 million people parade through the streets of Paris, testifies to the immense impact he had on his contemporaries. On that day, Paris does not just mourn a writer but a figure who embodied the very soul of the French nation. Yet Victor Hugo's legacy extends far beyond his time. His influence on French and world literature is immeasurable. He revolutionized poetry, the novel, and theater, paving the way for new forms of expression. His stylistic innovations, sense of drama, and ability to blend the lyrical with the epic have inspired generations of writers. In the realm of poetry, Hugo expanded the expressive possibilities of the French language. His collection, Les Contemplations, 1856, is a perfect example of his poetic virtuosity, divided into two parts, Autrefois and Aujourd'hui, separated by the tragic death of his daughter. This collection explores the full range of human emotions, from pure joy to profound sorrow. Poems like Demain, des L'aube, and Mélancolie have become classics, admired for their formal beauty and emotional intensity. La Légende des siècles, 1859 à 1883, is another major work that illustrates Hugo's epic ambition. This vast poetic cycle attempts to trace the history of humanity, from the creation of the world to the future. Hugo deploys his visionary power, creating striking tableaux that blend myth, history, and prophecy. In terms of the novel, Hugo's influence is equally significant. Les Misérables has inspired countless adaptations and continues to touch readers worldwide with its compassion for the oppressed and faith in humanity's capacity for transformation. The novel opened the door to more socially engaged literature, influencing authors like Émile Zola and Charles Dickens. In theater, the preface to Cromwell and plays like Hernani marked a decisive turning point in the history of French drama. Hugo liberated theater from classical constraints, allowing for greater freedom in the treatment of time, space, and the blending of genres. His influence is still felt in contemporary theater. On the political and social front, Hugo remains an indispensable reference. His fights for human rights, against the death penalty, and for universal education resonate today. His speech, Détruire la misère, delivered in the National Assembly in 1849, remains strikingly relevant, as he advocates for a more just and equal society, anticipating many contemporary social debates. Hugo's commitment to preserving architectural heritage also had a lasting impact. His novel Notre-Dame de Paris sparked renewed interest in Gothic architecture and contributed to the restoration of many historical monuments. Today, conservation efforts in France and beyond owe much to the awareness raised by Hugo. His impact on popular culture is equally remarkable. His novels have been adapted countless times for film, television, and musical theater. Characters like Jean Valjean, Cosette, and Quasimodo have become cultural icons known far beyond the Francophone world. The musical Les Misérables, created in 1980, is one of the longest-running productions in theater history and has helped introduce Hugo's work to an international audience. However, beyond his successes, it is perhaps in his ability to embody the ideal of the engaged writer that the greatest strength of Hugo's legacy resides. He demonstrated that an artist could be both a creator of beauty and a voice for social justice, a literary visionary, and a political actor. This conception of the artist as a public figure engaged in the debates of his time has influenced many writers and intellectuals after him. Hugo's work is also remarkable for its diversity. Although he is best known for his novels and poetry, Hugo was also a prolific playwright, incisive essayist, and even a talented visual artist. His drawings, long overlooked, reveal a surprising facet of his creative genius, showcasing a vibrant visual imagination and an astonishing mastery of light and shadow. The tumultuous love life of Hugo also deserves attention. In addition to his marriage to Adele and his long affair with Juliette Drouet, Hugo had numerous romantic escapades. These relationships nourished his literary creation, inspiring characters and situations in his works, and they also reflect the complexity of the man behind the myth, with all his contradictions and passions. A lesser-known but fascinating aspect of Hugo's life is his commitment to animal rights. He was a vegetarian and wrote several texts denouncing cruelty to animals, a position very ahead of his time. This sensitivity fits into his broader vision of a world where all forms of life deserve respect and protection. Hugo's influence even extends to urban planning and architecture. His writings on Paris, particularly in Notre-Dame de Paris and Les Misérables, have helped shape the image of the city and inspired efforts to preserve its historical heritage. The vision of Paris he offers in his works, both realistic and poetic, has profoundly impacted the collective imagination. The international dimension of Hugo is also noteworthy. He was one of the first to speak of a United States of Europe, foreshadowing the European Union. His influence extended far beyond France, inspiring liberation movements and writers around the world. Figures like José Martí in Cuba and Lu Xun in China acknowledge their debt to Hugo. In conclusion, Victor Hugo emerges as more than just a writer. He is a total figure, An artist, thinker, and man of action, his life and work remind us of the power of words to change the world and the capacity of art to transcend time and culture. What can we take away from Victor Hugo today? Perhaps that true greatness lies in the ability to combine artistic talent with social commitment, to never cease reinventing oneself, and to have the courage of one's convictions, even in the face of adversity. Hugo's life invites us to reflect on our own role in society. What is our responsibility as individuals in the face of the injustices of our time? How can we use our talents and passions to make a difference in the world? The legacy of Victor Hugo is a challenge to our creativity, our social conscience, and our ability to dream big and act accordingly. But it is also an invitation to see the beauty in the world around us, to defend what is just, and to believe in the transformative power of art and ideas. Whether you are a long-time admirer of Hugo or just discovering his work, one thing is certain: after exploring the life of this extraordinary man, you will never look at literature, art, and engagement the same way again. And isn't that the true power of genius? Thank you for your attention, and I count on you to like the video and subscribe to help me produce more content like what you have just seen.